Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, and it's great to be here on the red spot, and it's great to be here with you. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the world of public persuasion and about mass opinion formation. You can say I'm actually going to tell you a story about storytelling and how the stories that we hear drives our opinion and our views of how the world works. I have to confess straight away, perhaps that's not 100% about moral persuasion. Maybe there's some immoral persuasion in there. But this is, nonetheless, this is important because the stories that we hear drive the way we conceive the world. Now, it's also important because if you stack up the whole opinion formation industry, if you think about advertising, media, social media, marketing, political campaigning, elections, this is a huge part of global activity. It's probably 25% of global GDP. We deserve to know what's going on. We owe it to ourselves to understand a little bit more about how opinions are being formed. And what I'm going to hope to try and persuade you today is that the stories we hear are a fundamental part of this process. The stories we hear, and I'm going to take a look across a pretty broad spectrum of stories, whether they're from myth, from children's stories, from folk tales, through the world of history, Hollywood's a big one, politics, right down to you and me. And let's go anyway. As we go through life, we find that we walk beside stories, and stories walk beside us. We step beside them. We step on them. We step over them. And we like to believe that stories don't necessarily stick to us. We can find that they're pretty much neutral. But that's not altogether true. Every story that we walk over in some way has an effect on us. It drives our opinions. And the truth is that stories stick. They stick to us. They don't just stick to the bottom of our shoes, but they stick inside our brains. They stick in our heads. And they begin to drive the way we think about things. So what I'm going to do is to take a look at a quite simple way of dividing the world of stories into two. I'm going to say a little two-axis model. There's a vertical axis, which is the different types of stories that we encounter as we go through life. And then later on, I'm going to talk about a horizontal axis, a narrative axis, which talks about how those stories drive our moods, how they might get us to do things or not do things, how they might encourage us to believe in change, or they might just encourage us to shrug our shoulders, pay our taxes, and keep going. So this is not by any means an original idea. In the worlds of anthropology, the worlds of psychology, for many years people have talked about there being a fixed number of archetypal stories which drive everything. The classifications that I'm going to show you today, in fact, come from a writer called Christopher Booker, who wrote a very interesting, thick and rather dense book called The 7 Basic Plots. But here they go. I'm going to run through them as we go. The first one up is Overcoming the Monster. Boy, has this been a year for overcoming monsters. In 1 year, look what happened. Osama bin Laden, Muammar Gaddafi. It's been an astonishing year in terms of that very fundamental story, which doesn't just drive world events like this, but it also drives the plot of every James Bond story. It drives Little Red Riding Hood, many of these stories. And I'd also ask you to think that closer to us, closer to our world, when we see people who've, when we read articles about the rogue trader who dragged down a bank, how is he treated? He becomes the monster too. The CEO who ran off the rails and did something, he becomes the monster. You might even know there's a Broadway show of the unraveling of Enron, the monster CEO who caused all those bad things to happen. So overcoming the monster is a very crucial part of how we see the world. Number two, rags to riches. We love a story of success. We love stories that come almost by magic. The story of Cinderella, the story of Oprah Winfrey, the story of Google, which is a magical success as well. We love this sense that success comes almost magically, and that this process somehow reflects something within us. Inside every one of us is a little ugly duckling trying to get out. We want that kind of success to happen to us as well. And of course, politicians play on this. We have to question how Barack Obama has been so hugely successful in his rise to power. He traded substantially on his relatively humble and unlikely origins. So rags to riches, a very important piece of the puzzle. Number 3, the quest. It's great to have success happening by magic, but it's better by far to have a plan. It's better to go out with a specific intention of knowing how you're going to get success. And of course, that's the plot that drives great movies like the Indiana Jones sequence, Lord of the Rings. You can see where I'm going with this. And of course, the quest is a driver of classical myth as well. Now, you could say that big companies are also driven by a certain quest. You know, big old companies like IBM or GE, or even Microsoft, which is now a pretty old company in the scheme of things, they go out with a very clear plan, a very clear intention, and to an extent they change the world to fit their own desires. And you can see that having a plan is the way that the quest works. Number 4, voyage and return. It's great to go out into the world, to have adventures, but it's better by far to come back home again, laden with wisdom, laden with experience, and maybe laden with treasure. Voyage and return is the powerful driver of stories that we hear, Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels. I'm sure you can think of many of your own. It's also, voyage and return is an important story that drives our understanding of public affairs and politics too. Think about John F. Kennedy. We choose to go to the moon. Well, here we are. We choose to go to the moon. Actually coming back from the moon was more important than going. You remember the movie Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks? Coming back was really what it was about. And I'm not going to press it, but you could say that Nokia is trying to come back at the moment. It's trying to return with that baggage that it has of their world of mobile telephony. So that's an important one. Comedy. When I say comedy, I don't just mean comedy funny ha-ha, but comedy which recognizes that sometimes the world is out of whack, that things have got out of place. Individuals, boy doesn't love girl. People are messed up and they need to get their relationships back in order so that we can get a happy ending, that kind of comedy. And the Greeks, of course, when they invented comedy, they didn't know about the corporate world. They had no idea what would happen. But comedy fits so beautifully in the world of business. It helps us to understand what's going on. Think about the Office TV series. Think about The Simpsons. Just about every week, Homer Simpson is out there fixing something in the nuclear plant where he works. So comedy is a great healing factor. The great shame is that CEOs and business people seem to be kind of scared of comedy. Sometimes they say, you get the feeling they don't want to go near it. But there are a few exceptions. This guy, Guy Laliberté, he's in the business anyway because he runs the Cirque du Soleil. But the guy does his marketing from space with a red ball on his nose. He's in the comedy business. Richard Branson, similarly, does the same sort of thing. I'm going to zip on now to tragedy. Tragedy, of course, means the hard part of knowing we've got to do things over and over again. We've got to suffer. And tragedy has become a kind of a fashion these days in the world of business. CEOs seem to be on some sort of tragic jag over and over again. They mess things up for us. And how are we supposed to respond? What do we think about it? We respond by saying, "Jump, you fuckers." We can't stand it. Anyway, that's tragedy. Thank heavens, the last one is rebirth. Now, I'm not going to go all spiritual on you and say, oh, this is about the great religions of the world. But of course, it drives some of our circle of life stories. Disney, The Lion King, beautiful piece. But it drives something else. You're going to say, how could you have rebirth in the world of business? Well, I'd ask you to consider this. The recent great outpouring of emotion for Steve Jobs was really part of that thing. It wasn't just about the passing of the man. He caused his company to be reborn. But above all, he caused a rebirth in our interpretation of technology. Thanks to this guy, we can have technology on our terms, not on their terms. So that was a great change. Okay, that's my vertical axis done. And what I want to say is that knowing what types of story there are, we are conditioned to expect a certain outcome. Some of you may have children, and you know that they expect things to end the way they should end. If you tell a story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and you forget the bit about the last bowl of porridge, the child is not going to sleep. The child's going to be frustrated. And that's us. We want the end to come at the end. So that conditions us. But there's another axis, which is, I call here the narrative axis. The idea that certain types of story fire us up. They want to make us do things. Other types of story make us shrug our shoulders. We accept we can't change the world too much. Other types of story make us think, hey, we could deliver a happy ending. And others make us feel that we're going to be part of it. So the narrative axis, again, this is just as I took the vertical axis from a writer, I'm going to take the horizontal from a historian, a guy called Hayden White, who wrote a book called Meta-History. Basically what he said was that there's no such thing as objective fact in history and even economics. The guys are making it up as they go along, driven by certain patterns which perhaps even the authors aren't conscious of, that as people present the way the world works, they're presenting a system or a vision. So what I've done is I've taken 4 big events, global top-of-mind events, and we're going to look at them and see how they drive these things. The first up is satire. Satire, of course, is an emotion which makes us think, the world's crazy, it's messed up, we can't do much about it. We shrug our shoulders and we give a little wry laugh, but we can't really change it. And there's a big blockbuster production playing around planet Earth at the moment. It's a monstrous satire. It's called the Eurozone financial crisis. The Eurozone financial crisis can only be understood as some vast comedy, some vast satire that we really can't understand, we can't get to grips with. And it stars, hold on a minute, it stars these 2 guys. This is our starring actors in this big Broadway production, which has cost trillions, gazillions. How strange is it that Greece is being treated like a country that just lost a war? Germany is saying that in order to protect the euro, half the Eurozone has to be gone. It can only be understood in terms of satire. And in a way, in terms of our vertical axis, you can say this is a sort of rags to riches upside down. It's riches to rags. It's gone the other way. So that's the first of our moods. And you remember that these guys have been meeting in Cannes recently on the lovely Mediterranean coast. Well, for the second piece, I want to zip you across the Mediterranean to North Africa. And I want to introduce the second of the great moods, which is romance. Romance means things can change. Romance energizes us. It means things can be different. And look, here we go. In romance, we feel that we can have a new beginning. And look what's happened in the wonderful show of the Arab Spring. Not so long ago, we believed and we were told that the Arab world was kind of any son of a bitch so long as he's our son of a bitch and he keeps the oil flowing. Remember all that? Suddenly everything's changed. Now we're ready to tweet the revolution. We're ready to crowdsource a whole new leadership using Facebook. We're ready to believe in something different. And you can say in terms of the vertical axis, this is a quest to redeem our faith in democracy, to bring things back again and put them right where they belong. So that's a very energizing and very active emotion. Number 3 is tragedy. I'm going to stick with the sort of Arab Islamic world motif because I want to take you over over Europe into the world of Afghanistan and Iraq and ask, why is it that we keep doing these things? Why is it that in Iraq and Afghanistan, what is it we've got to learn out there? We've had Britain lost 3 wars in Afghanistan in the 19th century. Russia lost 1 war in the 20th century. Alexander the Great ran out of road in Afghanistan, and we're still there. And we're being encouraged to accept the idea that it's necessary. The suffering, the pain has to go on. The agony. It's a kind of conservative emotion that demobilizes us. But thank heavens, and I'm nearly coming to my last one now, thank heavens we have the wonderful world of comedy. And there is a fantastic production, an off-Broadway production that's playing at the moment. It's getting to be big. It's nearly as big as the Eurozone satire. This wonderful production that's playing around the world is called the Occupy Wall Street production, the Occupy LSX. I don't know whether you have something like this here, but it's a wonderful comedy. It's a comedy, and it's an anarchist force, because these people are doing something really interesting. They're not saying, we want this, we want this, we want this, you should do this, that, and the other. They can't even get it together to say what they want, but they give us a sense that something is out of whack, something is wrong. They've convinced us. Politicians are running around them saying, we think they've got something really interesting. We don't quite know what it is, but we should believe. So they have been able to do that. Comedy is liberating. These guys, you remember Generation X, Generation Y? I like to call these people Generation Y, WHY. And that's the question. They are asking questions. We should really look to what's happening with these guys. So just to finalize, I've given you my vertical axis, my horizontal axis. What I want to say now is two things. First, please recognize that stories are sticky. They stick to us. And be ready to ask the question, are they telling us a story or are they selling us a story? And the last thing I want to do is to say, we are storytellers. We have a voice. We are potential narrators, every one of us. We can get involved. We can change these narratives. We can ask how we can put the pieces together differently. Maybe we can turn satire into romance. Maybe we can turn tragedy into comedy. Maybe we can make these transitions. We are active players. We can tell stories. We can question the opinion formation process. And above all, what I want to say is that the current mood, the mood which is coming around the world, the Anglo-Saxon world, that the future will be worse than the past. We live in austerity. We must condition ourselves to accept less. Let's question that. Let's question why it has to be that way. Let's make the world better. Let's ask positive changes. Bring positive stuff for the future. Thank you very much.